We are ready. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this EU press briefing ahead of the G7 summit here in Taormina, Sicily, starting in a few hours. We start out with introductory statements by the two presidents, and without further ado, I invite European Council President Donald Tusk to take the floor.
Thank you, President. Good morning, buongiorno. We are meeting here in Taormina of the G7 to discuss the most pressing global issues. There is no doubt that this will be the most challenging G7 summit in years. It is no secret that leaders who are meeting today sometimes have very different positions on topics such as climate change and trade. But our role as the EU is to do everything to maintain the unity of the G7 on all fronts. Most importantly, unity needs to be maintained when it comes to defending the rules-based international order. Each day, we are confronted with these strategic global problems that pose a threat to peace and security in Europe, in Asia, and in the Middle East. From the war in Syria and Russian aggression in Ukraine, to nuclear and ballistic missile tests in North Korea, and land reclamation and militarization in the South China Sea. If our group is not determined and united enough, the situation in the world can really get out of hand. I expect that the G7 will demonstrate unity regarding the conflict in Ukraine. We fully support Ukraine's independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. A solution to this conflict can only be reached with the full implementation of the Minsk Agreement. Since our last G7 summit in Japan, we haven't seen anything that would justify a change in our sanctions policy toward Russia. Therefore, I will appeal to the other G7 leaders to reconfirm this policy. The G7 should also remain united when it comes to ending the brutality in Syria. We should be ready to increase our efforts to defeat terrorism in Syria and to find a political settlement. A special responsibility rests on the shoulders of those who, like Iran and Russia, have become involved in the crisis and cooperate with the Assad regime. Instead of wasting time, they should use their influence to enact a real ceasefire, stop the use of chemical weapons, and ensure safe and immediate humanitarian access to all the people in need. Finally, let me say that we also need G7 unity in managing the migration crisis. This is a global challenge, but here in Sicily it is also a real local problem. The EU's goal has been to at least keep the current level of international cooperation in addressing this crisis. Whether we will succeed remains an open question. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yes, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, buongiorno. I'm happy to be here. Was that for me?
You are too loud.
As you are, I'm happy to be here in Taormina for this G7 summit, the sixth, in fact, taking place in Italy, and I would like to thank Prime Minister Gentiloni for his hospitality and wish him all possible luck to have a successful Italian presidency of the G7. We will meet in a few moments from now, and there are 4 new leaders around the table. So Donald and myself, we are the only stable elements in the international landscape.
The only veterans, you know.
We are veterans, but we are not old. And so it will be very interesting to know these new colleagues in a better way, although we have seen some of them yesterday and the days before. We'll stand up here, as we are always doing, for our shared values of freedom, democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. We do believe, as Europeans, in open societies, and we are always seeking multilateral solutions. We want to build bridges, not walls. But we have to understand those in Europe and elsewhere who do not see how globalization works for them. I mean those 45% of Europeans who do think that globalization is a threat and not an opportunity. We do think that's an opportunity if dealt with in a proper way. We have to put fairness at the heart of everything the G7 and our partners do. That's mainly related to trade and to all the trade issues. Around a third of our national income comes from trade with the rest of the world. It supports 1 in 7 jobs in the European Union, and for every 1 billion we get in exports, we create 14 extra jobs. The EU's GDP is expected to grow by 1.9% this year and next year. All our member states, the 28, 27 plus 1, are expected to grow with 233 million people having a job in Europe. More people are working than ever before. Public finances are improving. We had an average deficit level of 6.1 in 2010, 2011. We are down now to 1.2, between 1.2 and 1.6. So the situation, the overall situation, is improving. During the first G7 we had in Bavaria and the next one last year in Japan, this time we don't have to discuss Greece in the same way we had to discuss Greece previously. Greece is on track, Greece is doing well, and I want to pay tribute to the courage and the dignity of the Greek people. Greece is a great nation and we have to respect that nation in the way I'm saying. Mr. Tusk and myself will have a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister later today in order to to advance our common trade agenda. Thanks. Grazie. Mille grazie.
Thank you very much. I now open the floor for your questions. And I think we start with an Italian question. Yes, on the 5th floor, the gentleman to the right, Marco.
Thank you. Good day, President. And Marco Zatterin, La Stampa. I have a question for two questions for the two presidents. On migration, which are going to be the proposals from the EU institutions and what we can expect from tomorrow's declaration? And on America, how optimistic are you that you can bridge the huge differences between the US and the EU on climate change and trade, which are looking like very, very, very difficult dossiers? Thank you very much.
The main political goal today and tomorrow regarding migration crisis is to keep the G7 group united, which means that despite new narrative we witnessed a few days ago, we have to keep this position that migration crisis is a global issue, not only local or regional. It means also a full engagement of all parts, of all parties around the table. And I hope that we will convince our new colleagues around the table that what we need today is solidarity and unity on a global level.
As far as climate is concerned, we'll discuss with our American and other partners and friends the issues. We will compare the way we do see things and the way the Paris Agreement has to be implemented and the way they possibly could see these problems. We do think that the Paris Agreement has to be implemented entirely, and that's the way we will discuss this issue later today.
Thank you. And now the gentleman in the third row. Yes, Alvise, please.
Hello, it's Alvise Armelini with the German press agency. I wanted to ask you whether it is true that in your conversations yesterday with President Trump, he told you that Germans are bad, very bad, because they sell too many cars in the US. And if this is true, did you chastise him? What did you reply to this? Thank you.
No, just one reflection. It's more for Jean-Claude, of course, but it's. In fact, I don't want, because if I understand well, we are talking now about this yesterday's leaks in some newspapers. I don't want to be a part of this new political culture of permanent leaks. My impression is that today's diplomacy needs professional plumbers rather than indiscreet diplomats. There are too many leaks, and I don't want to comment any leaks.
I don't want to comment, but I have to comment on this because we had a meeting with President Trump, which was a very friendly, constructive meeting. It's not true that the president took an aggressive approach when it came to the German trade surplus. I do really think, and for once it's true, that this is a real translation system. If someone is saying the Germans are bad, that doesn't mean that this can be translated literally. Hat nicht gesagt, die Deutschen benehmen sich schlecht. Hat gesagt, wir haben ein Problem, wie andere auch, mit dem deutschen Überschuss. So he was not aggressive at all. And anyway, without taking the defense of the Germans, I was making clear that the US cannot compare their trade situation with individual member states of the European Union. They have to compare their performances with the global performances of the European Union, and I made it clear that the Commission is in charge of dealing with trade issues and not the member states. Aber man muss das richtig stellen, also es wird übertrieben. Bad. Also ich bin kein Spezialist im Englischen, wie man weiß, aber bad heißt nicht böse. Schlecht reicht ja.
Okay, thank you. And now to the lady here in the first row.
Good morning, I'm Sylvain Chassani for the Financial Times. A question on Russia and the possible, lifting of sanctions, or considering. Can you tell us whether sanctions have been discussed, and if the U.S. president gave any hint that he would be considering lifting them? Was there any consensus on keeping the sanctions according to the Minsk agreement? And could you also maybe comment on whether Brexit has come up with the President of the United States, and whether he said that would cost him jobs if the UK were to leave, when the UK is to leave the EU? Thanks.
My impression was that when it comes to conflict in Ukraine, we were more or less on the same line with President Trump and Secretary Tillerson. It's, of course, maybe I am less optimistic when it comes to President Putin's plans and intentions, maybe less sentimental. But anyway, my reflection is that on Ukraine we can find a common position with the United States. And as for now, I think that it's a realistic assessment that we can continue our common policy towards Russia, including sanctions and Minsk agreements.
On Brexit, I have to say that we didn't mention at length the Brexit issue, but we were mentioning it en passant. We made it clear that this, in our eyes, is a real tragedy, that it is not in the interest neither of the British nor of the continental and the Irish Europeans. I described why we don't want other member states to leave the European Union, and I don't know any member state having the intention to leave. We were explaining, not in detail, but roughly what this is about.
But if you allow me, I should say also that I was positively surprised by President Trump's comments on Brexit, because it was clear for both of us that, in fact, the EU as 27 is more united after Brexit than before Brexit, and it was also his opinion. I tried to convince him that, and I deeply believe in this, that Brexit is very important and dramatic, but just an incident, not a trend. And President Trump agreed. It was for me a very positive moment during our discussion. Sorry?
We'll take one last question.
Yeah.
Yes, please. The lady in the second row, please. Yes.
Anushka Stana from The Guardian in the UK. After the Manchester terror attack, I just wondered if I could ask you a question, as you're going to be focusing on counter-terrorism today. Do you believe that security cooperation should be taken out of the Brexit talks and dealt with much more urgently than the other trade talks?
It's absolutely understandable that terrorism, counter-terrorism, ISIS was one of the main topics during our meeting with President Trump. Manchester was the most tragic context of our discussions. We can imagine. I was impressed by, determination and toughness of President Trump when it comes to counter-terrorism. I totally agreed with him when he said that the international community, G7, the United States, Europe, should be tough, even brutal, vis-à-vis terrorism and ISIS. President Trump was also very tough regarding North Korea, and in this very context he can count on us.
No.
Thank you very much. This concludes the press conference.
Thank
for
you.
attending.
Okay, thank you.